All right. Well, it was my first time playing here, I think. Yeah, that was fun. See that?
Not to be the last.
Not to be the last. That was actually very fun. Well, Bert puts up with me because most of the songs I know are from the 80s when music made sense, and campfire songs because I was a youth pastor. So like, we can do I'm in, right out, right up, right down, right happy all the time, but that might be a little much for us. So, you know, or we could build a campfire right here. That would be fun. Anyway, anybody remember what I talked about last Sabbath? Judges, that's right. And I started with the most famous judge people generally think of, Samson. And today we're going to back up a little bit and go from the beginning. However, where are my deacons? Who took up the offering? Could you guys come up here a second? Yay! Welcome to audience participation. This is what happens when you hire a former youth pastor to be your pastor. We all get involved. Actually, your job's very easy. Not a problem. Nothing at all. Have you guys ever played leapfrog? It's just a question. We're not going to play. I'm just curious. Yeah, you know. On that pew are pencils and paper. Could you just pass out and make sure, well, don't pass out. Hand out the paper and pencils to everybody. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to put on one side the person who in your life has had a profound spiritual impact. So if there's someone in your life, in your history, that has made a deep or some kind of spiritual impact on you, put their name, and if it's a relative, put how they're related to you. Okay? So, you know, my cousin Sam, or, you know, it doesn't have to be a relative, but
One person?
Just one person. And on the other side, the little harder part, yes. It's written, oh, yeah, you weren't supposed to hand out the ones that were written on. Sorry. Are they all written on?
Cross it out.
Oh, just cross it out and we'll do, this is called recycling, ladies and gentlemen. We're green here at Capitol View, and yeah. And on the other side, put down, a little bit harder, put down, if you were to be remembered for one thing, what would it be? So what, as people, if they read about your life, and there would be one thing that you would want to be known for. Your contribution to the world, your gift to the world, your whatever. What's one thing you would be known for? So give that some thought. And while you're doing that, I'll tell you, the person in my life who had a very profound spiritual impact was my grandmother. We called her Mama. Mama, my grandmother. And she was amazing. She was amazing. I was convinced as a child she had a direct hotline to God because she knew things there was no other way she could have known unless God sent Gabriel to tell her. For instance, I went to boarding school, Mount Pisgah Academy, and my grandmother, who again had been instrumental in raising us, one night me and a couple guys, we were thinking about sneaking out of the dorm, which is something you do in boarding school, I guess. And we were planning on it. We were going to sneak out of the dorm and didn't know what we were going to do once we got out, but we were going to sneak out of the dorm. And sort of my conscience, I was like, you really shouldn't. So I told them in the end, I wasn't going to. But like 5 minutes later, they said, you got a phone call down. And so I went down, and it was my grandmother. It was Mama. And I said, hey, Mama. She said, don't you do it. I was like, do what? You're doing something bad. Stop it right now. And I was like, no. And there was this long silence. You were thinking about doing something. It's like, how do you know this? But she was amazing in that I used to sit in her house and we would just read what was that book? The Home Bible Study for the Home, old Adventist book. We used to read that together. She had a profound spiritual impact, especially when she prayed. I remember staying over at her house one night, and I needed something, and I got up, I got out of bed, and I went to go get her, and before I got there, I heard her talking, and my grandfather died by then, and so I stopped and I listened, and and she was praying. I'm not sure why, but like at 11 years old, that had a huge impact on me when I listened to my grandmother praying and heard her pray for me and everybody. It was like, I never forgot that. So she had a profound spiritual impact on me. Okay, let me go ahead and get your papers. So the same guys that passed them out, could you pick them up for me? And just hear some of the things you wrote down. My dad, while they're picking this, I'll tell you, interesting, I didn't say that my dad was a huge spiritual impact on me, because he wasn't. Growing up, my father loved us and showed his love in various ways, but by his own admission was self-absorbed. Just totally about himself. And he had a conversion experience when he was, I'm guessing, 40, 45. His kidneys stopped working, and he had to have a kidney transplant, and so he had to do dialysis a little bit, and and then he was sure he was not going to make it, and it was that kind of near-death experience that really got him to reevaluate. Nothing focuses life like the oncoming of death. And he had a conversion experience and became a completely different man. And today's amazing. He's a great spiritual guy. He still has some of his rough edges, but he's a huge spiritual impact. To me, that's what he's known for. He's the man who changed. He's the man that dramatically changed. Okay, let me see these papers here, see what we got. Thank you. Thank you. All right. A grandmother. My grandmother had profound spiritual impact. And this person would like to be remembered as a loving friend to all. Very cool. Very cool. My grandma. Wow, grandmas have huge impact. Cool. My grandma. Complete kindness to all at all times. And it looks like teal, but I'm not sure what it is. Some friend of Jesus. Let's see. My grandpa. Good. Grandparents have a huge impact. A person that was honest. Very cool. And this person, Pastor Nelson. And they would like to remember it as someone helping others. Man, wouldn't this be awesome if everybody, like right now, visitors came to Capitol View and they just instantly knew you by these things, that they were always kind to everybody, that they were helpful, they were honest. Let's see, the changes in my life. Oh, this person wants to be remembered for the changes in my life to get me on the right track. Absolutely, absolutely. One more here. This guy's father, his dad had him and wants to be remembered as someone who laughs. That's awesome. Awesome. Okay. Before you came here this morning and looked upon the screen, did you happen to know the name of the very first judge of Israel? This guy right here, Othniel. They had weird names back then. Othniel. Othniel was the first judge of the Israelites. And he is, you guys know what a one-hit wonder is? Anybody know what a one-hit wonder is? Did anybody remember any one-hit wonders? Who? It is. Rock and roll. It's like bands that had one hit and then faded away. Bert, do you know any one-hit wonders?
That Thing You Do.
That Thing You Do. Someone read my newsletter. Thank you. That Thing You Do. There's lots of them throughout the ages, that bands that had one hit and then that's all you ever heard from again. They're called one-hit wonders. Well, the Bible has one-hit wonders. If you think about it, it's people who are, their stories in the Bible, and they're known for one thing. Like Noah. What's he known for? Noah built the ark. Simon of Cyrene. He's known for one thing, which is carrying the cross of Jesus. How about the disciple Andrew? Telling his brother, come and see. These guys knew one thing, yet they're in the Bible. There's stories there because God has these one-hit wonders people he pulls up for this one specific ministry. Well, Othniel was one of these guys. He's one of God's one-hit wonders. You have to ask, first of all, let's back up a little bit of history. Why did they need a judge? What had happened? Well, let's see what it says about Othniel. When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand. And his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim, so that the land had rest for 40 years. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. That's pretty much it. That's what you get. Not a whole lot of color there, just a little bit of a history. Why did God have to raise up Othniel? Well, the children of Israel, you know what their basic problem was? Math. They didn't understand math. Specifically, they didn't understand algebra. God's algebra, the algebra of the Almighty, which looks like this. X plus 1 equals y, whereas y minus 1 equals x. Do I have any math teachers here? Good, because I probably got this wrong. So, x and y in this particular instance have a direct relationship with each other. X plus 1 equals y, so if you change x, 5, let's say x is 5. 5 plus 1 equals?
6.
You guys did better in math than I did. So, if that's true, y minus 1 equals 5x. Well, x was 5. Y and x have a direct relationship, as do faith and humility. Faith and humility have a direct relationship as well. So, let's see, faith and humility. Humility is I can't, faith is God can. And as we add God and faith and less of ourselves for humility, we come up to be in a great place for God to be able to use us. The Israelites did not understand this, and it led to trouble. What had happened was, who led them into the promised land? God, yes, of course. You're one of these people in Bible class. She's one of those people. You know, whatever the answer, it's Jesus. He's the answer to everything. Yes. God used Joshua to lead the people into the promised land. And they went in, and God and Joshua both told the people over and over again, drive the inhabitants out. Get rid of them, and do not intermix with them. Do not join forces with them, for they will corrupt you, and you'll end up worshiping their gods, and it'll be horrible, and dogs and cats will be living together, and everybody will be unhappy. So you need to drive them out. And it was interesting that the first generation actually did that. The first generation from Joshua actually did what God said to do. But the second generation had trouble with it. Now here's why. Because when they went in, they didn't get rid of everybody in a month. It wasn't like God gave everybody an eviction notice and 30 days later they were out. It took a while. In fact, God told them it was going to take a while. Right here, God is speaking, saying, I will not drive them out before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and you inherit the land. God told them how it was going to work. He said, this isn't going to happen overnight. We're going to do this little by little, and it's good for you. I'm doing this to protect you. And yet, the children of Israel, their kids, didn't get it. So, what happened? The people served the Lord. This is Joshua's generation. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. When all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord nor the work which he had done for Israel. Apparently, these people didn't have their grandparents making a profound spiritual impact on them, because this is the generation after, and they forgot. They were suffering from spiritual amnesia because they forgot all the stories that their parents and their grandparents were telling them of how God led Israel and how God promised to do all this for them. And so they gave in to a couple of things. Well, they were comfortable. If you read the story, you'll find they got in, they took over the land, they came and brought down the cities, and they subjugated the people there. And things were good. Wow, why do any more? God gave us the land, and He gave us these people that we now rule, and they pay us money, and they work for us, and life was good. And conventional wisdom at the time would say that's exactly how you take over a land. You don't drive everybody out. You don't kill everybody off. You overpower them, you subjugate them, and then you make them work for you, and you make them pay money to you. And they gave in to comfort, they gave in to conventional wisdom. And one other thing. Sometimes it appears as though God is doing nothing when He's really working in His own time. So the lack of the speed of driving the people out got to convince the children of Israel, well, God's really not doing what He said He was going to do, and everybody else is doing it this way, and life is good, why rock the boat? And boom. They didn't fulfill the purpose and the plan that God had gave Him. And they ended up in trouble. Now, there was one guy who actually did what God said. And this is amazing. Caleb. You remember Caleb? Okay. Caleb, just before they went into the promised land, Caleb, as you will recall, was one of the spies that initially looked into the promised land and came back, right, and gave the report, and the guy's like, oh, they're giants, let's run away. Caleb, now that they're back, 40 years later, they're back at the gates of the promised land, and he says this to Joshua. Now therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day. That day is way back in the 40 years earlier. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, giants, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. I have no idea. Jephunneh? You want to try that one? Jephunneh, thank you. Why can't they have like Sam, Ed, Fred? The Caleb, the son of Fred. That would be good. As an inheritance, Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of what he said, Jephunneh, Gesundheit, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. Caleb did what God said, but he also did it because, and he told Joshua, you remember 40 years ago, God said this? Give it to me because I'm going to go do what God told me to do. And he did, and he was the only one. In all the tribes of Israel, Caleb and his group were the only ones who did exactly what God said to do, because they divided the land up amongst the tribes, right? And Caleb and his tribe took it, and they did exactly what it was. And they were the only ones to do that. Caleb he had the humility and faith put together. He knew he couldn't do it. He knew God told him to do it, and that God could do it. Caleb was a young man in Egypt. I don't know if you knew this. Caleb was actually a slave in Egypt. He was a young guy then, but he was there. He heard Moses say, let my people go. He was there and watched the plagues and how God delivered the people. He walked through the walls of water. He saw the water, that same walls of water, come down and destroy the armies of Egypt. He ate manna. He wet his whistle on water from the rock. He witnessed all these things, and that had a profound impact on Caleb. It's like, wow, God can do exactly what He says He can do. And so Caleb lived by that. He stood on the promises of God. He stood on God's word because God, and I saw all these ways God had led Israel and delivered them in the past. Well, that had a profound effect on him. And what's interesting, having that kind of relationship with God changes your perspective on things, doesn't it? Let's go back. Remember Joshua and Caleb, they went in, they spied out the promised land, and they were the two that came back and said, hey, it's great, there's wells we don't have to dig, it's flowing with milk and honey. The other guy's like, no, we can never go in and never take it, they'll destroy us, right? The perspective difference was based on their belief and relationship with God. It's like, all right, so there was this island, and these, it was a shoe company way back in the 60s, I think, and they sent these salesmen, two guys, over to an island to look about, selling shoes to the natives. And so the one guy gets over there and does a little exploring, and he calls back to the guy and he's like, don't forget it. Nobody here wears shoes. No reason for it. No one wears shoes. And the other guy immediately called back and said, no, send everything we got. No one here has shoes. Totally different perspective. And I think it's that balance of faith and humility that gives us a different perspective on life and life events, how things happen to us, how we react to. You remember, God's more interested in our reactions to life, not our actions. And so that gave Caleb a huge different perspective on life. And I'll tell you what, he passed that down to our man Othniel. Because who was Othniel? Caleb was Othniel's uncle. Remember? It said Caleb's brother, his son, was Othniel. So Caleb was Othniel's uncle. And they had a relationship. They actually had a connection. Because before Othniel became a judge, Caleb come up and he said, so they're taking over the land, right? And Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath, this is a big city, and takes it, to him I will give my daughter, Aksah, as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave him his daughter, Aksah, as his wife. So Caleb, and I got to believe it, he did it as sort of a test of faith. Because Caleb was going in, he was doing what God said to do, and I had this one city, and I think he threw it out there. Caleb could have done it, but he threw it out there, said, like, anybody take this city, and you can have my daughter in marriage. And boy, aren't you glad it's not like that today? I mean, now it's flowers and chocolate and everything. Back then you had to get a whole city to impress a woman. No, it was like they gave their daughters away if you did this monumental thing, And his nephew did it. You know what's interesting? There are no words in the Bible of Othniel. It records his actions, but not his words. That's because Othniel was a man of action. And so when Caleb said, do this, Othniel got up and did it. He did it because he knew from the faith his uncle had that God was directing him. And God said to do it, therefore he can do it. There was a pattern being prepared in his life to make him ready for the calling God was going to give him at just the right time. God usually doesn't call one-hit wonders out of the blue. He's usually working in their life through experiences, preparing them for the time and the moment he's going to use them. And that's what he did with Othniel. Othniel was set up by God. God sets us up sometimes. Doesn't sound very good, but he does. God sets us up for things we never dreamed of we could do. What's really interesting in Othniel's story is, the children of Israel, who you know in the Old Testament are symbolic and represent us, right? And they made the same mistake over and over again, right? They worship God, they get comfortable, and then, that's something about comfort, now that I say that. Sometimes we equate the absence of comfort in our life as God's presence not being with us. The absence of comfort being that, what are we doing wrong? But really, comfort is not a blessing. Comfort is a curse, really. Because when did the children of Israel get in trouble? When they're comfortable. When did the church of God get in trouble? When it's comfortable. I don't know that we're supposed to be comfortable. What's that song? World is not my home? World is not my home. So why should we be comfortable here? I don't say we can't have joy. I don't say we can't have happiness. I don't say we can't have peace. But if really this world isn't our home, I don't know that we should ever be comfortable. Because that's when they get in trouble. And they fall away and they go into sin, and God raises a deliverer and He saves them. And this is the first round of it, and there's something interesting He put in the very first judge. He's from the tribe of Judah. So Othniel is from the tribe of Judah. Also, his name means Lion of God. He's chosen to be the rescuer of Israel. Are you seeing how this is lining up? So here's a guy, nephew of Caleb. So God's got this guy who is the nephew of one of his men, one of his rock-solid men. And he works in his life, and he passes that faith on. And he works in his life, and he makes sure he gets the right name. He's from the right tribe. And we've got Othniel from Judah, the Lion of God from the tribe of Judah. What does that sound like? Jesus. Thank you. This is Jesus, right? In Revelation, it says Jesus was the Lion of Judah, right? Now, and he rescues God's people from their sins. They sinned into idolatry, and God raised him up as a deliverer from the results of their sins. So there you have Othniel, Lion of God from the tribe of Judah, saving the people from his sins. God set him up the whole time, so at this moment in time, He could use him not just to deliver Israel, but so you and I and everybody else in history can look back and go, wow, God was telling His story early on, showing His rescue of us. And there's even something even more amazing to this. Who did He defeat? There's no way you would know. If you did, I don't know what prize I would give you, because this is the weirdest name in the Bible. He defeated the king. The bad guy's name, the king of Mesopotamia, is called Cushan-Rishathaim. Cushan-Rishathaim. I don't imagine anybody knows what that means, so I will tell you. It means doubly wicked blackness. So not only is Othniel the Lion of God from the tribe of Judah that rescues people from their sins, the guy he rescued them from is double wicked black. The devil himself. And do you know what they used to do back in those days to kings? That they would cut off their thumbs and their big toes. Do you know why? Because then you can't walk. And try doing things without a thumb. You don't have the opposing, so you can't. And so what happened was they had to be beggars the rest of their life. And this guy was the worst. He said, I believe it says he had 300 kings he had done that to. And then it was done to him. And he actually said in the end, which is even more symbolic, after Othniel overtook him and they did this, he said, God is right. Your God is right, and I am being paid back for all the wrong I did. And don't we believe, Ellen White says that in the end, Satan himself will say, God was right. We have the entire salvation story here in the very first judge of Israel. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. Hebrews 2, 1:14 and 15. Jesus was showing us, and not just Othniel's story. As we go through the Old Testament, you're going to see this happen again and again, where God uses people to symbolize and give a story of himself and what's coming in the New Testament. They're all pointing forward to this. Othniel was one of his one-hit wonders that he poured this symbolism into and said, this is what I'm doing for Israel now, but this is what I'm doing for all of you. So it's okay to be a one-hit wonder. But to be one of God's one-hit wonders, we have to understand God's algebra of faith and humility. We have to have the perspective. What happens to us in life is not by chance. God's preparing us for something. Remember what we said about Samson. He was prepared for work before he was born, and so are you and I. You and I are no different from Samson. If we believe what God says in His Word, He says, I knew you before you were born, and I had a plan for you before you ever were even thought of. And if we believe that, that changes our perspective on life. How is God preparing us? What's He preparing us for? And what do you want to be remembered for? Now, one thing before Bert and I play the last song. It's easy for a preacher to stand up and say, God's using you for something. God has a plan for you. Da-da-da. Let's all go home happy. But then He doesn't tell you how to find out what that plan is. Here's how to find out God's plan for you. Here's how to solve the mystery of what is God preparing you for. It's kind of a trick answer. You do two things. Number one, you stand on the promises of God. Number two, you do the next right thing that's in front of you. The next right thing may be as simple as tying your shoes, but you do it. The next right thing may be going to somebody that you have a grudge against and taking care of that. The next right thing may be whatever. And I promise you, as you do the next right thing, and you trust and lean on God's Word, one day you're going to be able to look back and go, that's what God had in mind. That's what God was doing. And that's how we fulfill and live the purpose God's called us for. Live on His Word, do what's right in front of us, and He promises to take us there. Let's sing.
Standing on the promise.
Standing on the promise.